Buenos días, amigas y amigos. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos aquí esta mañana. Good morning, dear friends, Minister Balakrishnan, and esteemed colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your dissertation on what you're doing in Singapore and how you see these complex issues of climate change. Hearing a Minister of Environment and Water Resources talk about getting prices right, eliminating subsidies, sending the correct signals to markets so that investors have a long-term perspective as to where we would like them to invest rather than in other areas is not at all common or usual. I have heard more than one Minister of Environment, amigas y amigos, and we have a very different minister in Dr. Balakrishnan. But we also have a very different country in Singapore. I have had the good fortune of visiting Singapore a dozen times over the last 15 years, mainly to come and study what this country has been able to do and see what lessons can be applied to other parts of the world that I am more familiar with. And I am always impressed with what they have been able to achieve with their global vision and with the way in which they can bring about change in such a practical dimension. So thank you very much, sir, for being with us here this morning. Welcome to Creating Climate Wealth, our workshop summit. As Peter said, this is completely different from other summits. This is very action-oriented in our 4 working tracks to achieve tangible outputs, to share knowledge, to create new opportunities, to walk away with new friends and some ideas that may help us all in our daily work. Over the next 2 days, as we involve ourselves, roll up our sleeves in maritime shipping, in energy efficiency, which the Minister has talked about, or whether it be in your smart cities and M2M track, or your waste to energy track, I am sure that we will all go away with things that we did not know today, this morning. Now, I would like to share with you some answers with respect to why the Carbon War Room, why the Carbon War Room in Singapore, and why this Creating Climate Wealth event. And to do that, I would like to put it in the perspective of the times in which we live, which Dr. Balakrishnan already mentioned as times with changes. So let me, or allow me please, dear friends, to zoom out from Singapore, look at the big picture, and then come back in here to begin our work. Up until 2007, we enjoyed about 15 or 18 years of tremendous economic growth around the world. The developed world grew, yes, of course, as we would have expected, but so did the developing world also grow. Africa, on average, about 5%. Latin America, on average, 7 to 8%. Asia, of course, the champions, 10, 11% growth. And that growth allowed us both to take millions of peoples out of poverty, and on the other side, incorporate perhaps another 600 million people into a new middle global class. Much of that new middle global class here in Asia. And I will come back to that because that has important manifestations with respect to consumption patterns towards the future. Then came the 2008 economic downturn, much less felt in Asia than in the developed world. We resurrected Keynes because we were going to spend our way out of the economic crisis, and as a result of that, parts of the world were left with huge deficits that they are now trying to cope with. More worrying than the deficits, although they are of concern, is the increased rate of unemployment around the world that now puts at risk an entire generation that is perhaps the best trained, the best educated, the more qualified generation humanity has ever produced, and that are finding a hard time in finding a job, contributing back to the world, to their societies, and to building their families. When we read economists in different papers of the world, we find different answers to the situation we are in. Some say this is U-shaped, others V-shaped, others W because it's a double-dip recession. Some say it's a sign of the square root with very slow growth coming out. When economists start talking about signs of square roots, I think they've gone through all the letters of the alphabet, and we are into uncharted waters with respect to how we get out of this. And much more worrying than that, in my case, is what I see political leadership around the world doing, with few exceptions, Singapore being one of those exceptions. Because what I see is an intention to take us forward into the past. Forward into the past. The entire effort here is to take us out of this economic doldrum by going back to where we are coming from. And I would like to propose, in following Dr. Balakrishnan, that the future, a real future, is completely different. Perhaps we are seeing the end of 200 years that began with the Industrial Revolution. Perhaps a steam engine is losing its steam at a point in time when we are 7 billion people on the earth, and when we are, for the first time in the history of humanity, beginning to face some of the challenges which our minister mentioned, and some others which I would like to share with you here this morning. To begin with, perhaps like no other time in the history of humanity, are we beginning to feel the limits of our planetary system with respect to its resources when confronted with the increased demands of our population and its growth. About 3 or 4 years ago, China became the #1 market for the sales of automobiles. At that point in time, it had about 140 vehicles per 1,000 Chinese. In the US, the model is today about 920 vehicles per 1,000 US citizens. So if the model of transportation is the one we have in the US for the rest of the world into the future, and after China comes India and the rest of the world, we need about 4 or 5 additional planets to be able to cope with the resources needed in transportation alone. The second element that is changing dramatically is energy. And there we have gone through important shifts, both from the supply side and from the demand side. More recently, of course, we are all mesmerized by the illusions of shale gas, which in some parts of the world is being presented as this magical silver bullet that is going to take care of our energy needs, do away with climate change, and solve all of our problems as we move forward. In Spanish we say, no todo lo que brilla es oro. Not everything that shines is gold. And I believe that applies to the case of shale gas as well, which, yes, has a role to play with other types of energies as a transition towards renewable energies where we need to go. And of course, the third element is the effects, mainly of energy, but of our development style on climate change. The minister reached that the minister mentioned that in the last few days we've reached about 400 parts of carbon in the atmosphere. We are accumulating 3 to 4 parts per year. So because math does not lie, if you take 40 years to the mid-century, times 4 is 160, plus 400 is 560 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and that is a completely different planet from the way that we live today. So the future is not forward to the past. The future is not forward to the same type of development that we have been living with up until today. But the future, rather, is transitioning to a low-carbon economy. And yes, that is the challenge that Peter mentioned here this morning, in going from 768 grams per output of GDP to 6 grams. But that is also the greatest opportunity that we have faced as humankind. More than the opportunities that our grandparents were presented with at the outcome of the Industrial Revolution, we have the possibility to contribute, to be actors, and to be leaders in this great transformation going forward, where we need to reinvent the way we transport ourselves, the way we live, the way we work, the way we interact in society, and in that reinvention create the jobs and the opportunities for investment and the new business models that a world that wants to live better will require. So why the carbon war room in that global context? Towards the beginning of 2009, Sir Richard Branson, that will be here with us this morning, began a conversation with other global entrepreneurs, concerned and worried about the fact that the intergovernmental negotiating process that was set up to deal with a response to climate change was not advancing at a sufficient speed. And through a series of brainstorming exercises, they came up with the notion of the carbon war room. The name comes from Churchill's idea that to win the war, he needed to create a war room. And our mission is very simple. We exist to accelerate profitable and entrepreneurial market-driven solutions that reduce carbon emissions at the gigaton scale. At the gigaton scale because although we all have an individual responsibility to reduce our carbon footprint, here scale is important. And Peter invited us here this morning in his words to think about scale in our workshops over the next 2 days. How do we scale up the solutions that we come up with? And profitable, of course, because if the solutions are not profitable, we don't attract the capital and the entrepreneurship and the efficiencies and the wherewithal that the private sector brings to the table when it takes on a mission. Why Asia? Very clear. We're here first to learn. And so as Carbon War Room, we expect to get a tremendous amount of knowledge out of the workshops in which we will all participate over the next days. We're here to meet, to make new friends, to identify partners that in going forward with our operations will be able to become buenos compañeros de viaje, good companions in a voyage towards a future which we believe is possible. And of course, Asia and Singapore as a gateway because of the tremendous amount of activity and change that you are all a witness to. We already have one Asian partner working very actively with us in one of our operations, which, by the way, is our maritime shipping operation, and on which we have a working track here, led by Alistair Pettigrew, who is here with us this morning. RightShip, head by Warwick Norman. Warwick, are you here? Not yet. Has been our partner in the launching of a website called shippingefficiency.org. There are about 100,000 ships out there sailing the oceans, seas, and doing global trade. If you aggregate their carbon emissions, they would be equivalent to a country between Japan and Germany, about the 6th largest emitter of carbon in the world. And if you take these ships when they go up on a dry dock, which is about every 5 years, and you deploy a suite of technologies on them, you actually roll them off the dry dock consuming between 20 and 30% less energy, which is 20 or 30% cost savings to the global economy, and at the same time an equivalent reduction in CO2 emissions. So it makes business sense, and it makes environmental sense. And the question is then, why, if that is such a good, viable business proposition, isn't it being done in a greater degree today than what it already has? It's not been that way because of different market failures. Some are information failures that we have attempted to solve in the Carbon War Room working with RightShip through this website that I mentioned, which gives these ships an A to G energy efficiency rating as the ratings of a refrigerator or a vehicle, and which begins to bring more information to the market. And by the way, based on that information, last October, Cargill, Huntsman, and Unipec, Cargill, we know, the big grain mover, Huntsman and Unipec, two important charter companies, announced that they were going away from F&G rated vessels, which means 350 million tons not being transported anymore on F&G rated vessels, and which means a tremendous amount of improvement in the search for energy efficiency in our ships. Those are the things that are possible in other sectors as well. So why then creating climate wealth, this workshop summit? Because creating climate wealth, friends, is very much in a way the secret sauce in which the Carbon War Room works. When our research and intelligence unit identifies sectors of the global economy where carbon emission reductions are possible at gigaton scale in a profitable way, we begin to gather information and research on that sector, and at one point in time, we put it into one of our Creating Climate Wealth Summits as a work track. And that is the case here, for example, of smart cities and M2M. When we gather a constituency around the theme and we see that it has potential by the practitioners that are already in the field, we then move it into the unit of work, which is our network engagement and communications team. And from there, over a series of iterative processes where we build a community of strong supporters, allies, partners, and users, we then come to launch an operation. So you are an integral part of the work that we do, not only in terms of validating the flows and the operations we have, but also, of course, in terms of looking at the new possible operations that we may launch. Let me close by mentioning that it is also so fitting that we talk about this great transformation, this great opportunity we have ahead of us in Singapore. This country is known for transformations. Back in 1965, its GDP was $450 per person, and last year it was $57,000 per person. That's 127-fold increase. That type of transformation exemplifies the transformation that we need to work on together as we migrate into a low-carbon economy. And at the end of the day, amigas y amigos, this all becomes so intricately related to leadership. Every one of you here this morning is an agent of change. You're here because you're either already in this field, a practitioner, a seasoned veteran, you want to get into it, you have some ideas that you would like to share, or you have some solutions that you would like to bring back with you as you leave us here tomorrow. But at the end, you are an agent of change, a leader in the movement towards a low-carbon economy. And that is what will make the difference. Your leadership and these types of convenings in sharing our knowledge, sharing opportunities, and sharing a way forward. So thank you so much for your work here with us over the next 2 days. We in the Carbon War Room certainly look very much forward to this. Let me now call on Rajiv Ball and Kaz Brescher, our partners from Think, which is a tremendous organization with a lot of leadership, creativity, thought, innovation to carry us forward from here. Thank you so much.